Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode. And today we're talking about how to get perfect supports. And when I say perfect, I don't literally mean perfection. That's something only crazy people strive for. There is no such thing as actual perfect. I mean, sure, you can be perfect at some things, but honestly, the attribution of perfection is kind of an overstated term. What essentially I'm going to show you today is how to take supporting to the next level. If you're new to 3D resin support, if you are learning Lychee Slicer, if you are trying to get a leg up and do supporting yourself, because you're just absolutely tired of pre-supports failing and you want to get good quality prints like these, um, we do a lot of pre-support work for several different modelers out there. And one of the things that we find is that there is no one way to support a model. There's always going to be multiple ways to do it. So, I mean, I can tell you my way is better than somebody else's, but that's just me being egotistical. Personally, I know that my prints come out well. I don't have a lot of failures. We usually around 97.3% success, and that is still to this day. Um, we do have some weird issues every once in a while that do pop their head up. I mean, we get FET breaks and um, things like that we have to deal with, but I think every resin printer deals with those things anyway. So, regardless, Um, this is going to be an informative video for those of you that are learning or wanting to learn to up their game a little bit on supporting. We're going to go over different shape orientation. We're going to go over different ways to orient certain objects. And we're going to be going over the model that I showed you guys, which was the Frankie Foster here from Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends. And this is a one that came out last month, Digital Dark Pinups. As you know, we do the pre-support work for them. So that's always a lot of fun. And the characters, it's very important to the modelers that their pre-support work comes out well. It's very important that it is easy to use, and for the most part, the folks on the Patreon and other sources that are getting those models, we want to make sure that they're getting a good quality pre-support model that's actually going to be successful print. Number one, good quality, not a lot of damage, good holes, drain holes, things like that. And I'm going to show you how to get around, into that as well. We're going to talk about that today as well. And obviously, the quality of the print is important. So when we do our testing logic, we usually will go through a number of different parts, and we usually just go with the standard parts, and we'll kind of work our way from there. And Moby has decided to enter our filming session today. Anyway, we're going to get into this episode here, and I'm going to go over a bunch of parts, and hopefully my cat gets out of camera so we don't have to see him the entire time. But anyway, we'll cut right to it, and we'll get into the actual episode here. Come here. This guy. All right, so here we are, and the first part I've got up for us is the base, and the reason I started with this one is because it's a very simple shape. So now, in most cases, when you're looking to do something like this obviously this started solid, but I've hollowed this out. Now we talked about hollow and solid parts and drain holes, and I did say I was going to explain good drain hole placement. A lot of folks have asked me why I do drain holes like this, or I'll do like a couple of them. The reason for that is because you always need at least one hole for liquid and then one hole for aeration. If you only have one hole, this one might get blocked. Let's just say a lot of liquid pours through that or gets pushed through it. That still creates a vacuum. So there's still suction there. If this hole exists and it does not get completely covered or is able to push out air, then you don't have a vacuum there. So by adding multiple holes, I'm creating a way for the print to more comfortably get started, because hollow prints have suction issues. And for those of you that are familiar with hollowing and stuff like that, you know exactly what I'm saying. For those of you who are not, maybe hollowing something, you want to check out one of my episodes where I actually go into detail about hollowing and how to do it. Because I have a few of those on the channel. If you're curious, check them out. I'll try to remember to put some of those links in the description. But we do have a few videos where I discuss hollowing, different versions of hollowing, different ways to add drain holes, uh, things like that. So it goes in a lot more detail. But this is essentially just a very brief. This is a giant piece. It's very thick. It's about 147 milliliters worth of resin on its own. If you were to print it solid, you'd need to put some very heavy supports underneath it because of how thick it is. It would be very heavy. The reason we do stuff like this hollow is to save resin, first of all, and also make it a lot easier for the printer to print. Resin printers have to pull away from the FEP. So in order to lessen that strain, the less weight or mass you have pulling away from it will make a bigger difference, especially the further down it gets on the print, like when it's about here. This would be a giant chunk of resin. Imagine if this was solid, you'd have a lot more material in here. So always something to consider when you're doing your support work. So always keep that in mind. Not everything needs to be hollowed. I have learned many lessons about things that don't need to be hollowed. So keep that in mind. You don't always need to have things hollow. If it's a big, bulky, thick object, go ahead. If not, maybe just consider orientation. So once we have the part hollowed and oriented, we can go ahead and start digging into the setup of supports. Now, when you're starting out in Lychee, I highly recommend using auto supporting to give you a start. Some people are going to groan and disagree and probably even click off this video as I say that, but I'm going to stick with it. Auto supporting in Lychee Slicer isn't perfect, but it's also not terrible, and it's been improving with each iteration of the software. They've added this system called Structure as well, which gives new types of bracings that you can use and apply, and it allows the supports to create themselves on a grid. My biggest issue with it is it relies too heavily on tree supporting, and yeah, you can change that too in the settings as well for it. There's different ways to configure it as well. I mean, you can change the grid interval. Um, you can change them to parented rather than, all joined and stuff like that. But if you look at the way it creates these supports, it will try its best to tree together the supports as much as possible. And as much as I trust this stock, as it starts adding supports, I lose a little faith in this with one bar and three tips like this. I mean, sure, it might work, but I feel better if each one of these was an individual bar. So I don't necessarily love this for every project or piece or model, but it does have its benefits. So you can't unparent them like that. What you can do though is you can turn off the snap-on grid, and then we can delete those, and I can show you the difference of how that. See, this one just individually just creates each support, and if you wanted to, you could, you can create branches and stuff like that. Where you're duplicating supports and stuff like that. So it all depends. I mean, you can make them yourself. You can do them however you like, any shape like that. But this is getting more into creating your own intricate set of supports. And the video is more or less in kind of to guide you through, really, I want to say getting started, but also to try to perfect what you're doing. So when you're doing a big round object like this, or oval object rather, you really want to make sure that you apply supporting to the entire flat bottom of the surface, because this is where most of your supports need to be, and it's also, the damage is negligible because it's going to be on the bottom. No one's going to care. What you can do is you can use something called the support projection. So we can go over to the support projection menu by going over to the prepare manual tab and then going down to the bottom there where you'll see support projection. And I'll show you how this works. So we can use three different types. We have sphere, surface, and surface crease and surface angle. So we're going to use surface crease, paint that, and then I'm going to use the sphere. And we'll grab that. That should be enough. So let's go ahead and go over to preview. And I'm going to lower the interval just a little bit. 3.5. Yeah, maybe 3.9. There we go. So we're going to use heavies. We're going to keep a border and an infill, grid, and they're dynamically created. This is the tagging. The tagging doesn't really matter too much unless you really are doing a lot of support work and you want to keep track of them. If you're like me, the tagging matters. If you're just some guy doing this as a hobby, not so much. Now you'll see this curve right here. You can see where that's blacked out but doesn't have any orange dots. There will be no supports created back there. It's a low point, so that's not necessary. There also won't be any supports made up here because it's behind this. So it's kind of interpreting this as one plane, like between the top and the bottom here. So it's not really separating that. So when you'll see when it creates the supports how this looks. Yeah. First of all, it creates a lot of them. Like I said, based on the interval and stuff that you put in. But overall, this is actually a pretty good starting point. You could work with this. You could go ahead and go do your island checks, do your proximities, and make sure that everything else is accounted for. But you now have your border, you have your infill, minus a couple little areas here, and this thing's ready to go. Now, if we were to go and look at this and do auto supporting, there's a couple different settings. You can go low, and that's really not recommended because you're going to need more supportings than low is going to ever apply. Low, for some reason, I think low is meant for very small objects. Now, as you'll see, this didn't really give me anything on the border. This just really kind of gave me this cluster of supports in the middle, some towards the bottom, and some at the starting point. But this is definitely not finished. This is a very low amount of supports. And again, we're using heavy supports, which these are pretty heavy. I don't use much heavier than that these days. And if we wanted to do, let's say we wanted to do this normal. Let's just see the difference between these different settings so you all can see what I mean. So there we go with normal. And we can see that it has added a lot more supporting. And then we can go to high. And you'll see a massive difference here. Still does not actually fill out the border. And I'm not really sure why their auto supporting doesn't do that. Some of the other software I've used in the past does. So it is a little strange to me that this one doesn't recognize, oh, look, this is, I need to put a border here. One of the biggest ahas that you will have in resin printing is that if you learn to support your perimeter, meaning the border of this object, you will have a much better print quality. Now, that's not saying you don't need to support any of the interior of the object, because you do, but if you support that border, if you're supporting that outline or that shape of the object, you are going to get a far superior print. And so for something like this, what I would actually recommend is you're going to go to your auto settings, set it to normal, punch out some normal auto supports, and then go layer by layer using your layer slider and just kind of figure out where you need to add more supporting. Now, for a big base, usually the most obvious way is going to be to support the edge. And we can use Support Painter by holding the left mouse button and simply dragging across the object. And I slipped a little bit there. And you get an idea. And that will create supports next to each other based on the settings you have in your support painter. And that's, your interval and your max angle degree and stuff like that. So I will probably increase the interval a little bit because those are very close together, and just continue drawing our way up the side. And every time that little ring flashes, it's placing another support. And really what you want to do is you want to complete that ring around the base, and then you want to fill in any of the spots in the middle where you're going to need to fill in for either islands or just additional support. And I'm being a little sloppy here, I apologize, but a support painter can be a little sloppy. And there's a pretty decent border there that I just painted on. So you can do it that way too. You can also, if it's a square object, you can use inline supports, which are really cool. And that would be by placing a support on one part of the object, holding shift, and then placing a line of supports like that. It works really well on square, rectangular objects. It's a great time saver if you're looking to save time on your support work, and most folks are. So I did like another kind of pass with the support painting a little bit there. And now we have a little, mostly double border, fill in a little extra supports there. And then essentially you're just going to want to go to your islands, and you're going to want to search your islands and make sure that this is ready to go. But also, and this is the biggest thing, one of the things that will get you a better print every single time, and I want to kind of consistently follow back with this, your starting points. I can't stress this enough. The starting point of a print is so important. Take a look at the first bit of the print that touches your supports. You can see there's this little fine line here. It's very, very, very faintly visible, but it is there. So what you really want to do is you really want to place some supports as neutral as possible within this arrangement. So when that little thin, fine line shows up, it's still getting picked up by some of the supports that are going to be there. And that gives you a much better starting point. Like this support here that's kind of like off, we'll go ahead and put one over there, and I might actually remove the other one. And that should give us a better starting point. Now we have this piece here, that's this little fine piece that's being supported there. And then we have this little strip. And as that starts to build, then we need to add some supporting here just to make it consistent, and then kind of pull our way up that way. Now, if you look down underneath it, we can also take a look here and see where we might already have some additional supports underneath as well as in the front. And again, this is where you can kind of go back and play around with your border. Now, there is another way to do bases like this. You can also use the manual mirroring command, which will allow you to mirror the object in two different directions, either X, Y, or Z. And it's okay if you're using the object in like a native orientation, like just straight up and down, or when you're using weird angles like this, it's a little bit harder, to get it to, I could do it that way, up and down. But the X, well, I guess it's still technically there, but it's very odd orientation. See how the other supports are kind of weird? Yeah, it doesn't really work when when your print is not at like a regular straight up and down orientation. The system gets a little weird. So I don't use mirroring all the time on that, but it is an easy option if you just have like a circular base. Here I can demonstrate. We can do it on the other one as well. So here I'll pop this one out. This one I hollowed a little bit differently. As you can see, there's many ways to do this, and this one's even oriented a little different. So for this, let's go ahead and turn the mirroring on. I'll put it on X. So it's on the x-axis. So we'll go over here, turn the grid off, and I'll show you how this works, because this is pretty handy. See how it doubles the supports? As you put one on one side, it's putting one on the other. And if you do it this way, my suggestion is to just simply create the border like we did with the support painter, but just go up one support at a time. Yes, this will take you a little longer. Yes, it's going to be way more accurate. It's going to be way cleaner. So if you're looking to get into this and do supporting professionally, this is the way you probably want to do it. Not the auto supporting way, not the support painter way. You want to do it by hand, one little support at a time. And even if you're quick about it, I mean, you can get quick about it, but trying to be quick and accurate is also tricky. So go slow if you have to. I mean, it's not a race. I like I said, there's a few things you can use for time saving techniques that will get you same quality of print with a little bit less time consumption, but when you're using those tools, just keep in mind that it is just a tool. You still have to make sure that you're doing your work to the best of your ability when you're doing these support work, especially if you're doing it professionally. I can't stress that enough. There's a lot of folks out there who do really terrible pre-support work. Okay, so that once you fill that, there's your border. That's pretty clean, like I said, and that only took about a minute. So, and then you can go back and you're going to want to start your second row, kind of like we did on the other one. And they don't have to be super close. You don't have to cluster them in. Put them close enough. And just work your way around the oval. Man, that jumped. Until we get to the other end. And there is your double row. And then you can simply fill in the center however you need to. And obviously, you're still going to need to check the interior of the model because there's still stuff on the interior of the model that is there that you will need to support, like these little bits here that are floating. Those are islands, so please make sure you check your islands. For those of you who don't know what an island is, essentially it's a piece of the model that starts in midair. It's not connected to the model. It needs a support in order to be able to exist. So what you'd need to do in these cases is you'd need to create a support structure underneath this piece here. And you can create more supports than that. And each side, so a mirroring. So you see how it's created on both sides. So the mirroring thing can be quite handy. If you paint, it will also mirror. So that is a thing too. And you can do, your supporting on the inside like that. And then, like I said, you're really going to want to fill in the rest of it. So we can turn the mirror off once you're done doing the bulk. And what I would then recommend is you put in your supports around your holes like this. And we'll go up here. And we'll go ahead and put these around that. Okay. And then the rest of this is just going to be a matter of us doing the inline supports for the rest of it. Oops, that's too close. So then we're going to turn off the mirror. And we can go back and apply lines of, and then you can just simply apply your inlines for your infill. And we'll just create a few more lines. And aside from doing some bracings in here, which I will demonstrate in a minute, this is actually pretty good. So what we also need to kind of support this front end here as well. Make sure that this little lip up front has some supporting. There we go. The other thing I'm going to do is I didn't set the raft here. And then we'll go ahead and take a look at the structure, and then we're going to say tall objects and then update those bracings. Now, if you're not using the beta version of Lychee 6.0.1, you won't have this structure menu. Yours is going to look a little different. It's going to be under manual, and there's going to be a bracings menu there that you can apply bracings. But if we look at this, once I've applied all the bracings, this is actually going to be really strong down here. Now, we've got a couple hollow spots that you might want to add a few supports in, but I think for the most part, this is actually pretty good. Aside from checking islands and going through proximity checks, this is a pretty adequate way to do this. So I would recommend for objects like this kind of shape, you can do them like that. You don't necessarily need to put all these bracings on here like that. I just demonstrated that to show you the full bracing effect. It's a lot of bracings. You don't necessarily need to do that. Now, this will get you a good shape. It's going to get you low damage because all these supports are at the bottom, and they should even be easy to remove. Should just be able to squeeze and pull them right off once this is done. So this one should be a good one, and I hope this was a good example to start with. You guys can try that with some of the stuff that you might be working on at home. All right, now we're going to take a look at a few other parts rather than just an oval. As I promised, we were going to look at a bunch of parts, so here are the other parts. There's some legs, a hand, and a head. Now, the most complicated of these parts, obviously, is going to be the head because it has so many overhangs and weird bits because of the hair. And there's a couple different ways you can orient a part like this to make it better and make your supporting better. Or, as we've said, perfect. One of the things that I've seen some folks do, and I will occasionally, is actually put the head upside down. This makes all of these overhangs kind of go the opposite direction, so you have far less in the way of islands are concerned. However, with hair like this that's super texturized, it often creates its own issues because you have these layer chunks that start to form on their own, and each one of them kind of become little sets of islands anyway. So it really just depends. Pick your poison. Do you want to do a bunch of islands on the bottom of the hair, or do you want to support all this extra texture on the bottom here? And then this is the part people are going to be looking at. This is the top of the head. If you're doing this the other way around where it's upside down, you don't have to worry about the top of the head. Now, that's just the bottom of the head. Now, as long as you don't do anything too heavy, you shouldn't have to worry about chipping away any of these things like the earrings or the hair or anything like that. And for the most part, Frankie's head here should be pretty easy to orient. And I've actually put this in the orientation that I most recommend doing it. It allows you to get a pretty uniform shape, so you have both the front and the back there, not just a lopsidedness. It doesn't apply any damage to her face. There's no supports that are going to touch her face. So we have that. And it's at a good orientation for the damage, because if any of these supports do damage anything, they're going to be at the back of her head, which most people aren't really going to look for. So not too much of a concern. Now, the hand, pretty simple. I often think about arms and hands are often looked at, I think, pretty simple. The way I try to orient these guys is I will make it so that way any fingers that are extended, I make sure that they're pointing up, not hanging out. I don't want a finger to be an overhang. That's the fastest way to snap a finger off. Now, these are pretty thick parts, so I don't usually worry about them breaking, but there's still a chance if you put too much pressure on one of these fingers, it will definitely snap off. So for something like this, I recommend an orientation exactly as I have it. As you can see, this actually creates the least amount of overhang, and the least amount of islanding problems. You have two parts that start the model there. They join together. This is going to go straight up. And the only other islands you have are the fingers that are folded. But very briefly, as we can see here, this is a very small island that starts really briefly. And then this one is also very brief. And then this part of the thumb here is also, I think, very, very tiny. It might actually not, that's not really an island. These two right here are the only islands. Thumb doesn't really get affected that much. And then the fingers that are pointing up, they don't need anything at all. They're just going to go straight up. So really, this entire object actually only has about 4 islands if you orient it this way. So very good way to orient this particular body part. Now, if we're looking at other parts, such as the legs, these are a bit different because they're a bit long. So you've got this odd orientation because it's got this long strip at the bottom. We've hollowed and put the holes here because I will hollow legs as they're just big tubes and don't take up more material than they need to. And so this is the way I decided to do these because this entire part of the bottom of her legs are flat as they press up against the base. So this was a perfect opportunity to cut the holes here, as this part of the model no one will ever see. So regardless of the holes or anything else, you don't need to worry about any of that. That all is just going to go right down onto the base, and it won't be an issue. The only massive overhangs or islands on this particular orientation are the feet. And it's a little bit frustrating on this model more than some of the others because she's barefoot, and each toe actually creates 2 islands as it pops up on either orientation. But honestly, this was one of the best orientations I could find for this object. Since it's almost rectangular, I mean, you can kind of apply, that shape logic to it. It is kind of like a flat rectangle with curves at the side. But you'd want to orient this like any other part. You want to make sure your perimeter is supported. So you'd want to take your supports here, and you're going to want to create supports along the flat area. And you can create however many deep or whatever. And I'm doing medium supports on this because it's not quite as big and heavy. You want to go ahead and support around the key. You can use inlines on these since these are nice flat surfaces. And that is the basic starting point for that one. And of course, we need to go in and refine. But again, perimeter. And if you use these yellow zones, these checkered zones, as kind of like a guide as your perimeter, you're really going to want to make sure most of the area within this yellow zone is at least supported moderately. Okay? And again, perimeter first, then worry about the infill. You can even go back and do your bracings later. That doesn't matter too much. And again, you're going to want to do islands and proximity checks. And if you're really, really, really new to Lychee and you don't know some of these functions or terms, please check out the channel. We have tons of tutorials on Lychee. I have gone over many of these things before, but this is a more comprehensive video with more information in it. And I wanted to kind of go over some of this as well. So one of the other things you can do to get yourself a perfect print is you can, again, perimeter. I'm going to say it again. This is the waist, right? So the body's cut in half. You've got the bottom half, and then you have the upper half. So what you want to do here is you're going to want to, again, take your supporting, and we're going to want to look and see where this print is going to start. So here's the back. And that's a big piece. So we're going to go ahead and move the orientation a little bit. Just tilt it. And then we're going to just apply the raft real quick and then go back. Okay, so now here we're starting in this corner. And this is round. So we can apply a circular style border here. And again, we're going to do a similar thing that we did to that giant base. You're just going to go around the perimeter. And I'm using my mediums here as well. Again, the settings are up there if you guys want to use them. Feel free. And just go around the back. All right, and there is a good little border. Now, the reason I keep sticking with this whole perimeter concept is, and again, the perimeter of the print needs to be supported, as does the rest of it. But the perimeter of the print, if you support it well enough, it will help maintain the print. And the rest of your supporting can be lighter and allow for a lot less damage and a lot easier support removal process. So I think it's important to explore different methods of supporting like this to kind of broaden those horizons. Now, if you're new and you're just getting into this, then I recommend going the route of using the auto support feature and then kind of tacking on supports where you need to add them. This will give you a nice start. Now, some folks disagree with me and say that's not the way. Auto supporting is terrible. Yeah, I would have agreed with you a couple of years ago, but to be honest, I've used auto supporting myself, and I have done many videos on the subject where auto supporting is not necessarily the devil. It does have its place. It works really well for small miniatures as long as you go back and just validate and make sure that everything is clean. But it has its purposes. It can also do the supporting on the interior of the model for you quite well, so you don't really have to deal with it, and then all you have to focus on is really the exterior. But there's the bottom of that. Now, if you printed this like this, obviously minus the island stuff that I'm not dealing with, this is a really good contact here, and I think you'd get a really solid result. Now, I know I got a solid result because I have the model printed, but the bottom line is for those of you that don't, that if you're still not getting it, perimeter, infill. Now, it's not the same as FDM where infill is like the stuff that's inside the hollowing. No. This is infill. When I say infill, I mean the stuff in between your border. So this section here is your border. Everything else in between is your infill. So again, border is important. Infill is just as important. But if you maintain a good balance between the two and you have a good structure on your border and you have good infill in between, not only will your print come out better, but you're going to have far less trouble removing supports too, because it's going to be a lot more uniform, and you should just be able to squeeze and pull these guys off, especially with the medium support settings I have set here in Lychee Slicer. So being that the case, this, again, depending on the shape orientation of the part, you can do this differently. Like we had the head before. I can bring that back up and show you guys the difference there. So let's take a look at the head. Where'd you go? Okay. So here we have a couple spots down below. And again, we're going to use medium supports. And we're going to take a look at the bottom here. So we have the key that starts there. And there's a couple supports I'll put at the bottom. And then we'll go ahead and put supporting around the neck. If we start here, that's about where that starts. And this is at an odd angle, so it's not going to be the cleanest looking circle, but there will be a circle of supports there when I'm done. Okay. So there is the neck area. And then again, the reason I keep going back to the shape orientation is because this is a circle. So we're creating a circular border. This is more of a V shape or a triangle. So we're going to create a triangular border around her chin. And then not really much infill needed there, because that's going to grow up from her neck. So you don't have any islands there. We just have a natural graduation. But I want to have some supporting here where her chin is to greet the rest of this mass, because the head's going to start to get heavy around this point. And they're not super heavy, but it's enough where the medium supports might give way if we don't have enough residual support going all the way up through the model. So that's something also important to consider in part of getting a perfect print, is you need to consider both the supporting on the bottom and the supporting on the top. The model needs to be supported from the bottom, obviously, because that's where you need the stronger supports. But you also need to continue supporting the model all the way up. Otherwise, it's going to lose some details, or you're just going to have an unfinished print that's just not going to, the top half's not going to print. So you always have to remember to think of it as a ladder. You're going to start on the bottom floor, but you want to work your way up to the top. And the supports kind of need to reflect that. So if you're starting out with really hard supports at the bottom, mediums, you can probably progress up to the light supports as you get closer to the top, because you're not going to need as strong of a support up there, but you are going to need something that's going to catch the material and make sure that it is supported at least a little bit to make sure that it prints properly. So that's some of the ways that we can apply some of that and the different styles of supporting. Now, again, if we look at this is a similar type of shape to the upper body. You do the same thing I did there. You draw a border and then do your infills. If we were to, let's say, entirely do, I had mentioned before that the doing auto supports can do your internal structure for you. So what does that look like? I'm sure you guys are curious. So we'll go ahead and show you. If we do that, we actually turn on auto supporting so you can see what this looks like. You can see it doesn't do that bad of a job, but actually, if we compare it to the one that I did myself, it is sort of following the same context. It's just not giving you as much of a border and a fill, but it's going for the toes, it's going for the key, it's going for this area. It is intelligently trying to place the supports where it feels that it is needed. Is it done? No. But look at the inside. See, this has created supports on the inside. So now you don't need to worry about this as much because this is supported. Now, when you're doing your supports manually and you're just going step by step, you have to worry about all that too. And when you're just starting, you're probably going to forget. So it is sometimes beneficial to let the auto supporting kind of show you, hey, these are all the things that we need to focus on. And it kind of gives you a better idea of where to move from there. And I'm not saying that that's going to make perfect prints for you every time, but it's going to lead you in the direction to get to where you are eventually making perfect prints. But again, one of the most important things to focus on is perimeter. Now, we talk about islands a lot, and I talked about islands a lot in this video, so I kind of want to demonstrate what I mean. And this is the other type of method you can use to support. We've gone over manual, we've gone over preview, we've gone over inline, painter, mirroring. I've shown you guys shape orientation support. Now we're going to go over the last style of support, and this is island supporting. So in order to really get this effect, you need to set up a resin profile in Lychee that is set to 20 microns. And most people don't have printers that goes that low. I mean, you might have a nice fancy 8er, 8 or 12K or whatever they're up to now. I think some of them are 14 and 16K at this point. You may be able to print at 20 microns, but I currently do not have a printer that prints at 20 microns. I use this as a test. This is a test setting in order to um, check my layers and stuff like that for really small islands. So you're going to have to set up a resin profile. And easy to do this. You can just take one of your existing ones. You can copy it. And then just make sure to edit this to 20 microns, 0.02. And then you have it set. So then what you're going to want to do at that point is you're going to want to go over to your islands. And then you're going to, actually, I'm going to let me delete this. And then you're going to want to search. And this sometimes can take quite a while, depending on how tall the model is and how low or high your layer heights. The island search can take a while. You can also lower the accuracy, which will make it go faster. But I think the bottom line is you do actually want a high level of accuracy. So making it go faster is sort of defeatist because you're going to miss something. It's not going to be as thorough if you're letting it do, like, let's say, real versus like normal. It's a totally different setup. So this is about done here. See exactly, and I'll show you. Okay, so 61 islands total. And then I'll show you every little red spot on this model is an island. Now, duh, these are islands too, because this is where the model starts. So what I would do in this case, if I was supporting a model this way, is I would start with my heavies first and apply them in the locations that they are needed. So like the big points down here at the bottom. Then we're going to put 1 or 2 on the hair right there on each ponytail, excuse me. And I will put 1 on each one of these back here. And I try to get them about center on the island because I try to balance it as much as possible. And again, just, make sure that you're covering the spot. Don't worry about every single island your first pass. I'm going to show you exactly how we take care of the rest of those in just a second. Again, we're using our heavies first. Tips of the island touch the heavies. The heavies are nice. They have a nice size tip. So in most cases, it's usually enough to have one, maybe with like a medium next to it or something for most islands, depending on how far they are away from the model and how long they're going to float on their own. So there's like a basic framework, and you can start to see the model is starting to get supported this way. Now, you can, in theory, do this and then just support the rest of the perimeters needed. And I think you will still wind up getting a pretty good print that way. Now, it may not be 100% success because this is right now, I mean, we're looking, this is pretty light. So even if I went through every layer and did this, I think you'd still have to probably go through and refine it. But is this the good way to start? Sure, if you want to be incredibly thorough. So we're going to switch over to mediums now. I'm going to show you the rest of the way we kind of finish this in. So I'm going to do these mini supports here. And we'll just, now there's no more additional islands next to this, but I'm going to go ahead and spread that out a little bit. And you can see how we're slowly starting to get more of a structure that actually looks like it's, probably able to slowly start to support the model. If you ever can't find the islands, use the show function or use this little arrow to hop between islands. It's a very handy function. And pretty much all you would do at this point is you just keep going. I've created multiple layer profiles here that I can search with. I would then search again. I would let that do its search. And then once that's done, we could apply the next set of islands supports that are needed. And again, supporting your islands properly and learning when to use medium and hard tips is also going to benefit you a lot, because one of the biggest things that we do often in the beginning is we will use the largest support tips and just hope for the best. That is not a good way to do it. Okay, and then we simply need to do that one more time. And again, these go a lot faster the lower the layer height gets. So when you go from 20 to 50, it tends to speed up. See, we found no more additional islands at this layer height. So at 50 microns, this is good. Now, I can't say I recommend printing it like this because it's definitely not going to work. But at this point, you would then take the rest of this, fill it out, make sure you get your supports where you want them to be. We've already checked our islands at this point, so we know those are good. So now you don't have to spend any more time looking at islands unless you delete a lot of supports during your work. But if you're pretty consistent and you don't do a lot of replacing and deleting, you should be pretty good. It's really all a matter of just making sure that you get your overhangs and your islands, and then just make sure you have adequate enough support to support the rest of the model. Actually meant to make those mediums, not heavy, so we can easily change that. These are mediums down here, so that's good. A couple heavies on the key, which is fine. Okay. And if that's looking busy, then you're correct. It is looking a little busy. So from here, and this is one of the things you can, just depends on how you want to do it. Every one of these yellow areas needs attention. So we would add supporting here. We would add supporting along these parts of the hair. And yes, I'm using the support painter because why not? Works pretty well for areas like that. And then just make sure that you have some supports on the side of the head and up here on these bangs. And then we have a little bit more there. And support the ear a little bit on either side. And then you're probably just going to want to add a couple supports back here on the ponytail. And then we will add our bracings. We're just going to say strong object because it's a solid object. And there we go. And we've got a couple little naked spots in here. I'll add a couple supports to, because these ponytails are just going to be, these little bits of the hair on the back of her head are going to be just kind of hanging out by themselves. And so I think they need a little bit of love and support back there. And voila, you have a fully supported head, pretty much. Minus a few things that I would probably just validate layer to layer. But that's it. It's supported. Bracings are on there. Islands have been checked. The only last thing you can do is just click that run for proximity there. And we can just fix those by going here, support and proximity. Oh, and of course, I'm getting that graphical glitch. So we can remove them, which is what I usually do anyway. And then I just check to make sure that none of my islands have been messed with. So, should be good. Um, yeah, sometimes the proximity stuff is a little bit buggy. Lychee has a little bit of a bug in it where sometimes these support, you're supposed to be able to view them on their own, but every once in a while it does tend to get stuck. So there it is down there. You can check your islands after you do that just to make sure you didn't delete anything that's supporting an island, and then kind of go from there. But for the most part, this is pretty much done. And this is actually a pretty viable way of doing supporting like the, well, maybe this piece of hair need a little bit more support back there. That's actually pretty light. But this is actually a pretty valid way of doing supporting. And I know quite a few folks who will use this method to fully support their models. So this could be a method that you could use yourself for sure. All right, everyone, that's pretty much it for this episode. If there's anything you all would like to see as far as learning, lessons, tutorials, please leave a comment below and let us know what it is you'd like to see. One of the things that we're constantly trying to strive for is to deliver more informational content. We've done a lot of episodes covering things like anti-alias settings, orientation, different support styles. This particular video is also kind of, I don't want to say it's a repeat, but it is definitely something I have discussed before. But I tried to go into detail about different styles of supporting this time to give you guys some different kind of well-rounded information about different styles of supporting and how you can use those workflow methods in your own work. I hope this video was good, informative, educational. However, whatever you got out of it, I hope it was something, and I always appreciate you watching. So thank you so much. We appreciate you all. See you all again real soon.